Harrison Ford was grieving at his wife's funeral when, suddenly, a strange little girl appeared. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear about his wife, something that instantly left him in shock. "I can't accept the fact that you're gone." That was the last thing Harrison Ford whispered to himself as he knelt in the mud beside his wife's ashes. The sky was a dull gray, the kind that presses down on your chest without meaning to. All around him, the crowd was thinning, expensive coats, polished shoes, and the scent of lilies that had nothing to do with peace and everything to do with covering up the stench of grief. The funeral had lasted less than an hour. That was all. Just 1 hour to bury 18 years of marriage. He hadn't chosen the urn, hadn't even picked out the flowers. That had all been handled, according to the people who suddenly took over when Eleanor died. Dr. Raphael, a man Harrison had trusted for over a decade, was the one who insisted on the immediate cremation. "It's for the best," he had said, his voice steady but his eyes darting like a man caught in the wrong room. "You don't want to remember her like that, Harrison. Believe me." And Harrison had believed him. Or at least, he'd been too hollowed out to fight back. Now, as the last of the mourners left and the silence returned, something inside him stirred. It wasn't closure. It wasn't peace. It was the quiet dread of knowing something didn't feel right. Not with how fast everything happened. Not with how nobody dared to look him in the eye. Not with how cold that damn urn felt, like it belonged to someone else entirely. And then came the whisper. "Sir, your wife ain't dead." The voice didn't belong to a mourner. It was too soft, too raw. Harrison turned slowly, expecting perhaps a grieving friend of Eleanor's, or maybe some stranger needing comfort. Instead, it was a child. A little girl stood behind him, thin as a breath, dirt smudged across her cheeks, hair in uneven braids, jacket 2 sizes too big. She couldn't have been more than 8, and yet her brown eyes looked ancient. She held out her small hand, palm up. Resting there was a gold ring. Not just any ring. His ring. Eleanor's wedding ring. The very same he had slid onto her finger on a summer afternoon 18 years ago, in a small stone chapel in Vermont, with no one but the wind as witness. There was no mistaking it. The engraving inside read, E+H, all time, no lies. Their private promise, their impossible vow. His heart stopped. "What?" he breathed. "I saw her," the girl said calmly, as if she wasn't shaking. 3 nights ago, under the San Rafael Bridge. The guards, 2 men in black suits who'd stood by all morning like statues, moved forward quickly. One of them reached for the girl's arm. Harrison raised his hand. "Don't. Not a damn step." The girl flinched but didn't back away. "She gave me this," she said. "She told me to give it to you. Said you'd know what it means. Said she's alive but scared. Said you'd understand." A beat passed, then another, and then the noise of the world seemed to fade completely. All that was left was the sound of his pulse, loud and erratic, pounding through his ears. "Your name?" he asked her. "Junie," she replied. "You have somewhere to go, Junie?" "No, sir. Not really." He looked at the ring again, then at the girl, then at the urn behind him. Something had cracked wide open in him, and now the flood was coming. "Come with me." By the time they reached his car, Junie had said nothing else. Harrison didn't press her. He sat beside her in the back seat, glancing at her reflection in the tinted window. She stared out blankly, her tiny hands clutched around a cracked leather pouch. "Where's your family?" he asked eventually. "My mom died 6 months ago. Dad's in prison. I've been on my own mostly." She said it flat, like reciting math. No anger, no self-pity. "And how did you find Eleanor?" Junie turned to him. "She found me. I was sleeping under the bridge, like I do when it's not raining. This car pulled up, black, real shiny. A man was driving. She looked real scared, like she was looking for someone who wasn't there. Harrison's breath caught. "She gave me the ring," Junie continued. "She told me, 'Find Harrison. Give this to him. Tell him I'm not dead. Tell him he has to look deeper.'" Then the man pulled her back inside and yelled something I couldn't hear. "Did she say anything else?" Junie shook her head. "She cried. That's the last thing I saw before they drove away." The rest of the ride was silent, but inside Harrison, the storm had already begun. He didn't say a word as they pulled through the gates of his estate, a sprawling, cold house perched on the Valencia cliffs. A place that had never felt emptier than it did now, with Eleanor gone. And maybe not gone. The house had always been too big. Even when Eleanor was alive, it carried a certain hollowness, like a well-decorated hotel room you never really moved into. But now, with Junie's small frame barely making a dent in the hallway shadows, the place felt cavernous. Empty in a way no amount of money or marble could fix. Harrison didn't speak for the first hour after they got back. He poured himself a glass of something expensive he couldn't taste and stood by the fireplace in his study, watching the flames flicker as if they might offer him some kind of answer. Junie had fallen asleep on the leather couch, curled up like a cat with one hand still holding her cracked pouch close to her chest. Even in sleep, she looked guarded. That ring burned in his pocket like it knew something he didn't. He pulled it out, held it between his fingers under the firelight. The inscription was still there. Clear. Crisp. E+H. All time. No lies. Same font, same spot, same weight. The very same ring Eleanor was buried without. Except, she wasn't buried. She was burned. That was what they said. That was what they rushed. That was what Raphael insisted on. Harrison closed his eyes and let the timeline replay itself in his head. The call from the highway patrol, the crash, the explosion, the urgent recommendation to skip a viewing. "It's better you don't see her like this, Mr. Ford." The waiver form, the signature, the ash, and now, this ring. It should have been ash too. So what the hell was it doing in the hands of a child? He walked across the room to his desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out the accident file Raphael had handed him. He hadn't wanted to look at it back then. Now he forced himself to. Page 2. Identification of the victim. No DNA test requested. Identified by personal effects. Handbag, ID card, coat. Photographs unavailable due to burn damage. Autopsy waived at family request. He hadn't waived anything. He'd just nodded like a man in a daze. There were no photographs, no dental confirmation, just a signature he barely remembered giving and a push from a doctor he'd trusted too much. He flipped to the last page. A blurry traffic cam still of what was supposedly Eleanor's car. But even he could see the make and model didn't quite match. The VIN number had been blacked out. Something was wrong. And not just wrong, manufactured. A hand tugged his sleeve. He turned. Junie stood beside him, sleepy-eyed but steady. "You're gonna ask what I think," she said. He blinked. "What do you think?" "I don't think that was your wife in that car." She walked to the chair and sat, pulling her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "I've seen scared people before," she said. "Folks who ain't running from trouble, but from someone." "Do you know who the man was?" he asked. "He called her Ellie. Told her to get back in the car, said they ain't got time for this. Big guy, black coat, not yelling, but like he was in charge of something." Harrison's jaw clenched. Did she look like she knew him? Junie nodded slowly. She didn't flinch when he touched her arm, but she kept looking around, like she hoped someone was coming. That was enough. Harrison rose from his chair, grabbed his phone, and made the first of several calls. First to an old friend from the security firm he'd once hired during a political campaign Eleanor had managed, then to a retired detective who owed him more than a few favors. Finally, to a private investigator he'd used discreetly a decade ago when someone tried to leak insider details on a hotel project. By midnight, he had 3 professionals in motion. Find out who was driving near San Rafael Bridge 3 nights ago. I want every plate scanned, every camera pulled, even the broken ones. And I want Raphael watched. No contact. Not yet. Just eyes. He hung up and looked back at Junie. You said the man called her Ellie? Junie nodded. She hates that nickname, Harrison said, more to himself than to her. Only one person ever got away with calling her that. Junie tilted her head. Who? Her father, Tom. Marshal Fuentes had been a king in tailored suits for as long as Harrison could remember. Sharp, ruthless, respected. The kind of man who could smile while slowly twisting the knife. He'd never liked Harrison much, and he hadn't hidden it. When Eleanor left her share of the family business to start a community project for women and children, Marshall didn't speak to her for 6 months. That was the kind of man he was. Now, Harrison couldn't stop thinking about that clipped, brief appearance Marshall made at the funeral. Quiet, cold, barely looked at the urn. Didn't say a word to Harrison. Didn't even fake grief. And Raphael? He was there too, sweating through his collar, mumbling medical phrases like he was covering something up. Eleanor had been surrounded by men who played too close to power. Now she was gone. Or maybe hidden. And the only real clue came from a homeless child who had nothing to gain and everything to lose. Later that night, Harrison stood outside Junie's door, listening to the soft sound of her breathing. She'd insisted she didn't need anything, but when he brought her a blanket and a nightlight, she whispered, "Thank you, mister," in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used gently in a long time. By the end of the week, Harrison had a headache that wouldn't quit, and a file on his desk that felt heavier than any casket. The report came in a plain manila envelope. No return address, just his name scrawled across the front like a dare. He opened it slowly, half hoping it was all some wild mistake. It wasn't. Inside were 2 sets of photographs, one from the night of Eleanor's accident, what was supposed to be her accident, and another from a scene reported that same night on the outskirts of Valencia. 2 different crash sites, 2 different women, but damn near identical in size, build, even hair color. And while Eleanor's file had a list of personal belongings, wallet, driver's license, coat, there was one glaring note scribbled in red pen across the margin. No jewelry recovered. That didn't sit right. Eleanor never took off her wedding ring. Not once. Not in the shower. Not even during a gallbladder surgery years ago. It was a symbol she clung to. Said it reminded her who she was when everything else around her felt like quicksand. So where was it now? In Junie's pocket. From Eleanor's hand. Harrison leaned back in his leather chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He'd gone from mourning to mistrusting in less than a week. Now, all he felt was bone-deep betrayal and a cold, creeping sense that he was just scratching the surface. He reached for the second page of the report. It detailed the other accident, the one nobody wanted to talk about. According to police files, accessed through a back-channel favor owed to an old golfing buddy, there had been a fire, just like the one in Eleanor's crash. A body found, charred beyond recognition. But this body? No ID, no next of kin. Listed as Jane Doe. Middle-aged, average height, no fingerprints, no DNA tested. And then, just gone. The body had been removed from the morgue within 48 hours. Disposition. Released to private transfer. Medical study. No paper trail. No questions asked. That wasn't a medical study. That was a cleanup. Later that night, Harrison met with Carlos, his private investigator, in the back booth of a seafood joint off the harbor. No menus, no small talk. Just the file, a battered laptop, and a bottle of cheap whiskey between them. Carlos lit a cigarette and exhaled like he was buying time. "You're not gonna like this," he said. "I already don't," Harrison replied. Carlos turned the screen around. Security footage from the area near your home the night Eleanor went missing. Took some digging. The screen showed static at first, then a short clip flickered on. A black sedan pulling up near the south exit of Harrison's estate. Time-stamped 4 hours after Eleanor had supposedly died. A man stepped out. Tall, dark coat, confident stride. He opened the back door. A woman emerged, staggered a bit. He grabbed her by the elbow, not rough but not gentle either. Even through the grainy footage, Harrison could make out her frame, her walk, the way she held her hand close to her chest, like something was hurting inside, and she didn't want anyone to see. "Freeze it there," Harrison said. Carlos paused the video, zoomed in. The man's face was angled just enough toward the light. Harrison stared, and stared, then swore under his breath. "Vincent." Carlos looked up. "You know him?" "Used to. He was like a brother to me once. Until Eleanor made me fire him." Vincent Torres had been Harrison's right hand for over a decade. They'd met at university, built a company from the ground up, survived 2 bankruptcies and 1 lawsuit. But Vincent had always played in the gray, made decisions behind Harrison's back, smoothed things over with bribes when paperwork got messy. Eleanor saw it before Harrison did, told him plain and firm, "He's going to sink you if you keep trusting him." Harrison didn't listen, not at first. Then the press got wind of a building contract in Sevilla that was riddled with ghost employees, fake invoices, money funneling into offshore accounts. Vincent took the fall, quietly, no court, no fuss. Just gone from the books and out of their lives. Until now. Now he was back, and standing beside a woman who may or may not be Eleanor on the night she supposedly died. Back home, Harrison sat on the edge of his bed holding the ring again. He looked over at Junie's room. She was inside, probably asleep again. The girl had taken to the house with caution, moving like someone who'd been thrown out of too many places to trust she could stay in one. He owed her more than food and shelter. She was the only reason he wasn't sitting in that graveyard believing his wife had turned to ash. He got up, walked down the hallway and tapped gently on her door. Junie opened it a crack. "You okay?" Harrison asked. She shrugged. "Just thinking." He nodded. "Me too." "I saw the guy again," she said, eyes flicking upward. Harrison's brow furrowed. "What guy?" "In a picture, on a book downstairs. You and him and some other folks wearing suits." "That's Vincent," Harrison said quietly. Junie stepped back and opened the door wider. "I think he's the one who made her cry." By morning, Harrison had a plan. Not a good one, not a safe one, but something better than sitting in the dark. He called Carlos. "Dig deeper on Vincent. Find out where he is, who he's working for, and how the hell he ended up with Eleanor that night." "Understood," Carlos said. "But be careful, man. These folks don't clean up accidents for fun." "I'm past careful," Harrison replied. "I'm done being lied to." He stood by the window as the sun started to rise, casting a dull orange haze over the ocean. The cliffs below the house looked jagged and endless, like the edge of something permanent. This wasn't just about Eleanor anymore. Someone had swapped a nameless woman's body for his wife's. Someone had watched the cameras fail. Someone had paid a man he once trusted to vanish her into the night. For the first few weeks, Junie didn't unpack the small backpack she'd arrived with. She placed it on the floor of the guest bedroom, now hers, and stared at it the way folks stare at something that might explode if touched wrong. Harrison never asked what was inside. He figured she'd tell him if and when she was ready. That was a rule he'd learned the hard way with Eleanor. Don't press too soon. Some truths take time to bloom. The girl had come from places no child should have seen, and though she slept in a bed with clean sheets now, her nightmares didn't get the memo. She'd jolt awake in the middle of the night, gasping, clutching the sheets. Sometimes Harrison would find her already sitting by the kitchen island at dawn, arms folded, eyes puffy. She never said what the dreams were about. He didn't ask. Instead, he'd scramble her some eggs, pour her milk, and talk about whatever nonsense crossed his mind. Baseball, stray birds, the tides. It wasn't eloquent, but it was warm. Junie listened like someone who'd never had anyone bother to fill a silence just to make her feel less alone. Something started shifting between them. Quietly, unsaid. By month 2, Harrison noticed she'd stopped looking for the exits. She no longer hovered by the doors or checked the windows before bed. She still walked light-footed, like someone used to running, but there was a slowness in her step now, a permission she gave herself to linger. And then, one crisp afternoon on the patio, Junie finally spoke a truth that hit harder than any file folder or hidden report. They were sitting on the wide veranda that wrapped around the southern wing of the house, the sun starting to dip into the horizon. The ocean stretched out below them, calm and indifferent. Junie was drawing. She'd taken to sketching lately, faces mostly, always women. Harrison suspected she was trying to reconstruct Eleanor from memory. She didn't look up when she said it. "Mr. Ford, if we find her, if she comes back, are you going to send me back out there?" He didn't answer at first. It was the way she said back out there. Not like it was a place, but a condition, a state of being, the street, the foster homes. The corners where kids like her learned to dodge questions better than they dodged rain. He looked at her, this small, serious girl with old eyes and a scratchy voice, and realized something that made his chest ache. She was no longer just part of the mystery. She was the only part of the story that felt real now. "No," he said after a beat. "I won't let anyone put you back out there." Junie didn't smile, but her pencil stopped moving. Just for a moment. That was enough. Of course, the world didn't stay quiet for long. Somewhere around month 3, the whispers started. A blurry photo on some blog. A side shot of Harrison outside a bookstore, Junie beside him, her hand gripping the hem of his coat. The headline, "Reclusive developer adopts orphan?" His lawyer, Cole Brewster, showed up 2 days later, red-faced and ready to snap a clipboard in half. "You've got a target on your back the size of a billboard," Cole said, pacing across the study. "You're housing a minor without any formal custody. No paperwork, no court filings. You're a walking scandal, Harry." "She's not a story," Harrison said flatly. "She's a child." Cole dropped into the chair across from him, rubbing his temples. "And I respect that. I do. But tabloids don't. You think the Fuentes family won't use this? They'll twist it into something dark and ugly. They'll say you're unstable, that you're acting out from grief." "I'm not acting out," Harrison snapped. "I'm finally acting right." So, he started the paperwork. Quietly, carefully. He hired a tutor, a retired teacher from Madrid who cooked as well as she taught, and enrolled Junie in a small private academy known for discretion. She took placement tests and blew past every expectation. "Smart as hell," the headmistress told him with a half-smile, "but guarded. She doesn't trust praise yet, doesn't know how to receive it." Harrison understood. That kind of armor took years to build. He attended parent meetings, filled out school forms, checked the lunch menus like he'd been doing it forever. The staff called him Dad by mistake once. He didn't correct them. The thing was, somewhere along the way, Junie stopped being a guest in his life. She became the echo in the hallways, the laughter in the kitchen, the dry remark when he miscounted spoons or burned toast. She teased him when his phone buzzed during dinner. He scolded her gently when she left socks on the stair landing. The house stopped being quiet, and that scared him more than anything, because now there was more to lose. 6 months in, Junie came into his office late one evening holding something in her hand. It was small, worn, a necklace with a cheap silver charm. "This was my mama's," she said softly. "She gave it to me the night before she passed. Said to keep it close 'cause one day I'd need a reminder I come from someone who loved me." Harrison took it gently, examined the charm. It was shaped like a bird. "Can I leave it on the windowsill in the room upstairs?" she asked. "It's where the sun hits first." "You don't want to keep it by your bed?" Junie shook her head. "No, I think it wants to fly." He placed the charm on the sill himself the next morning, just as the light poured through. It gleamed like something alive. The storm rolled in just past midnight, not the metaphorical kind either. This one came with real thunder, real lightning, and rain that pounded the rooftop like it had something to prove. The wind howled through the Valencia cliffs, shaking window panes and slicing through the silence of the mansion like a blade. Harrison had been dozing in his study chair, half awake with a book lying face down across his chest. Junie was already asleep. He'd checked twice. Her bedroom door was closed, the little bird charm glinting faintly on the sill under flashes of lightning. He was just about to turn in himself when the house alarm let out a muted chime. Someone was at the gate. He blinked, sat up, checked the monitor on the wall. A figure stood beneath the stone arch, soaked to the bone, hood pulled low, shivering like a leaf. A woman. He pressed the intercom button. "Who is it?" The voice that came through was barely more than a whisper. "It's Cristina Ramirez. Please. Please let me in." He froze. Cristina. The doctor's wife. Raphael's wife. Harrison hesitated just long enough to taste his own doubt, then punched the gate release. Cristina looked like she'd run through a hurricane barefoot. Her coat was stuck to her body, shoes covered in mud, and her mascara had long since given up the fight. She stood in the foyer wringing her hands, flinching every time thunder rolled above the house. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. Harrison handed her a towel. "You should sit. I can't stay long." He led her to the fireplace. She hovered by it like a ghost, warming her hands without speaking. "I've been carrying this around for months," she said finally, fishing something from her soaked purse, a small USB drive. She placed it on the coffee table like it was made of glass. "What is it?" Harrison asked, though part of him already knew. Cristina didn't sit. "It's the original file, the real one, from the morgue." He stared at her. "You're saying the autopsy was faked, modified, sanitized. Raphael didn't even examine the body. He just signed off what was handed to him." The fire cracked. The room didn't move. Cristina looked down at her shoes. "He didn't want to at first, but he got a call from Marshal Fuentes, offered 500,000 euros, said it was a family matter, said Eleanor had agreed to disappear, that it would be safer for everyone if the record stayed clean." Harrison clenched his jaw. "And he believed that?" "No, he was scared." "Of Marshall?" She nodded. "Of what Eleanor might have uncovered. She'd been asking too many questions about the Foundation's offshore accounts. Said something didn't add up. Raphael overheard a phone call she had the week before. She mentioned Europol. That hit like a body blow. Harrison rose, paced toward the window, then turned back to her. "You knew all this and waited 6 months?" Cristina swallowed. "I've been trying to forget, but I see her in my dreams, the way she looked in her wedding photos, like she had the whole world in her hands." She shook her head, tears streaking fresh down her face. "I told Raphael if he didn't come clean I would, but he left, packed a bag, flew out 2 days ago. No note, nothing." Harrison picked up the USB. It felt strangely warm in his hand. "This proves she's not dead?" he asked. "It proves they never confirmed she was alive to begin with." Cristina turned to leave but paused at the door. "If you find her, tell her I'm sorry, and tell her I never meant for any of this." Then she was gone, swallowed back into the rain. Harrison stayed up the rest of the night. He plugged the USB into his laptop, and for the first time, saw the images. Raw, unedited, damning. The body listed as Eleanor wasn't her. Wrong bone structure, wrong height. The coroner's notes had been wiped, replaced with boilerplate language. The woman had no jewelry, no scars, no dental match. Someone else had died in that crash. And Eleanor had vanished, deliberately or forcibly, into the wind. Marshall had done this. Her own father. To protect a company built on secrets. To silence the daughter who looked too close. At dawn, Harrison knocked gently on Junie's door. She opened it, still half asleep, rubbing her eyes. "Sorry, honey," he said. "I need to tell you something." Junie stepped aside. She didn't ask why. She could see it on his face. They sat on her bed, and Harrison explained as simply as he could. About Cristina. About the fake autopsy. About Marshall. Junie didn't cry. She listened the way she always did, with her whole body still, but her eyes fierce with something older than her years. "She's alive then," she said finally. "I think so. And the man that made her disappear, that's her daddy?" Harrison nodded. Junie picked up the little bird charm from the sill, held it tight in her hand. "She gave me the ring," she said, voice low. "She looked right at me and gave it to me. That means she wanted to be found." "Yes," Harrison said. "Yes, it does." Junie turned to him. "Then we find her." He looked at her, something catching in his throat. "Junie, you've done more than anyone already." "I ain't done yet," she said. "She believed in me. Now I believe in you." It was a simple thing, a child's promise, but it lit something inside him, something steady, something strong. The first breadcrumb came from a traffic camera tucked just outside Valencia International Airport, obscure, half obstructed by a pine branch. Harrison almost missed it, but Carlos's team knew where to look. In the grainy footage, a black car rolled into a private terminal the morning after Eleanor's funeral. Out stepped Vincent Torres, in a long coat and sunglasses, and a woman. She was slim, shoulders hunched, wearing a scarf that hid most of her face. She moved carefully, head down, like someone carrying a secret she didn't want to spill. The customs log showed her name as Pilar Gomez, but Harrison's gut twisted. Eleanor had once joked she'd use that exact name if she ever needed to disappear. She said it sounded like a soap opera heroine, he murmured to himself. The plane took off 30 minutes later. Destination, Catania, Italy. From there, the trail grew thinner, but it didn't vanish. By the time Harrison called in his last favor, a quiet contact in Rome who owed him for saving his son's real estate deal, the map had narrowed to a place most tourists wouldn't find on any brochure. A hillside sanctuary in the Sicilian countryside, a stone convent carved into the bones of an old vineyard, run by cloistered nuns from an order long known for harboring the lost. The Order of the Wounded Dove. "Sounds like a novel," Harrison said quietly as he read the translated name aloud. Or a warning. His contact explained that the order took in those fleeing danger, victims of war, abused women, even political refugees. No phones, no questions, and most importantly, no records. Once someone entered, they could vanish in peace. If Eleanor had chosen to hide there, or had been taken there, she'd be buried under layers of silence. But it was the first real sign she might still be alive. And if Vincent was visiting, he wasn't just a traitor, he was a gatekeeper. Harrison began preparing quietly. He didn't tell Junie yet, not until he was sure, but Marshall was already moving. News came by courier, a thick envelope with a wax seal. Inside, a formal notice from a Valencia court, a petition, filed by Marshal Fuentes himself, requesting the immediate psychiatric evaluation and institutional custody of Junie. The language was clinical and cold. Delusional attachment to a deceased woman. Fabrication of key evidence. Unstable behavior consistent with abandonment trauma. Attached was a false medical evaluation from Dr. Rafael Ramirez, dated only a week before he disappeared. Harrison's hand shook as he flipped through the papers. His stomach turned to stone. They weren't just trying to scare him. They were trying to erase her. He called Cole Brewster, who arrived within the hour, fresh off a red-eye flight and furious. "This is surgical," Cole said, pacing. "They're weaponizing the court system. If this goes uncontested, she'll be in state custody within 72 hours. "She's a child," Harrison said, voice hoarse. "She's a threat," Cole replied grimly, "to people who don't want the truth on record." Junie sat quietly in the doorway, listening. She didn't say anything, but Harrison saw the tremor in her fingers, the way she curled inward like someone bracing for another storm. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, she came into Harrison's room. "Am I going to be taken away?" He sat on the edge of the bed, pulled her close. "Not while I'm breathing," he said. She looked up at him. But you can't fight everybody. Not forever. He exhaled slowly, brushing a stray curl from her forehead. Then we won't fight alone. The next morning, Harrison called a press conference. He hadn't spoken publicly in almost a year, not since Eleanor's death. His name still carried weight, especially in the city's old financial circles. But this time, he didn't speak like a man with a legacy to protect. He spoke like a father. He stepped in front of the cameras with Junie by his side. She held his hand tightly, clutching Eleanor's wedding ring in the other. He cleared his throat, looked out at the crowd, and began. "This child," he said, voice clear, "risked everything to tell me a truth no one else dared to believe. That my wife, Eleanor Ford, is not dead. That the reports were false. That someone faked her death to silence her." He paused, letting it settle. And now, those same people are trying to silence the only witness who saw her alive. He turned slightly toward Junie. She's not delusional. She's not unstable. She's brave. And what she saw might just save a life. Junie didn't say a word, but her grip on his hand tightened. Harrison raised the file in his hand, the printed proof from Christina's USB. "This is the real autopsy," he said, "the one they tried to bury, and this," he held up the medical evaluation, "is a lie." The media storm exploded. By noon, social media was ablaze. By evening, news anchors were using phrases like, "the girl with the wedding ring," and "the man who won't let his wife's memory be buried." And by morning, the court had issued a postponement. No institution, no forced evaluation. At least not yet, but it wouldn't last. "They'll come again," Cole warned. "And next time, they won't use lawyers." That night, Harrison sat Junie down at the kitchen table. The storm outside had passed, leaving the house wrapped in a kind of cold quiet, the kind you feel in your ribs. "There's a place in Sicily," he began. "A sanctuary. I think your friend, Eleanor, might be there. And the man who took her. I know where he'll be next." Junie looked up, eyes steady. "Are we going?" "We're leaving tonight." She nodded. "Okay. What do I pack?" Harrison smiled, tired. "Not much. Just the truth." She looked down at the ring in her palm. "I got that already." They left just after midnight. No grand goodbye. No farewell press. Just two figures in a black sedan rolling toward the airport under the cover of darkness. The road out of Valencia wound through olive groves and quiet towns that hadn't changed in 50 years. Harrison kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift like an old habit from his racing days, back when he thought speed could outrun grief. Junie sat beside him, blanket pulled up to her chin, earbuds in but no music playing, just a shield between her and the world. She didn't speak much that morning, only glanced out the window now and then like she was cataloging the last of what she was leaving behind. Santiago followed in a second car, always 2 lengths behind, always watching. Ex-military. No nonsense. Harrison didn't trust many people anymore, but Santiago had saved his life once in Morocco, and trust like that didn't expire. By the time they crossed the Murcia border, Harrison's phone buzzed. A secure message from Carlos. "Target confirmed. Torres Estate in Altea. Remote surveillance active. No martial presence detected." He exhaled through his nose, low and steady. They were doing it. They were really doing it. At a roadside cafe in Denaya, they stopped for gas and grilled cheese sandwiches that tasted like cardboard but felt warm in the hand. Junie pulled a sketchbook from her backpack, the same worn one she'd carried since day one, and quietly began to draw. Harrison didn't notice at first, too busy scanning the parking lot for anything unusual, but when he sat down across from her, coffee in hand, he saw the page. A woman's face, half in shadow, strong cheekbones. The same tired kindness Eleanor used to wear when she was worried but trying not to show it. It was uncanny. "You remember her that clearly?" he asked softly. Junie didn't look up. I only saw her once, but it's been stuck in my head ever since. Harrison studied the sketch, the slant of the nose, the curve of her lips. It wasn't perfect, but it was Eleanor. A living version, not the one in framed photos or press clippings. This was a woman hiding something, a woman waiting for someone. Did she look scared? He asked. Junie paused her pencil. She looked like someone who wanted to be found, but didn't know if she'd be forgiven. He didn't answer. Some things hurt too much for words. 3 days. That's how long it took them to reach Altea. They drove only at night. Slept in safe houses Harrison arranged through old contacts. People who still owed him favors from back when Eleanor ran the family foundation and Harrison made problems go away for the right people. The last stop was a secluded hillside estate, once a vineyard, now overrun by bougainvillea and silence. It belonged to the Torres family, Vincent's family, and had been empty for years. Vincent had it prepped months ago, maybe for himself, maybe for Eleanor. Harrison didn't know. He only knew it was far from everything. And that was the point. The villa faced the sea. The back opened to a narrow inlet, private and shielded by rock. It felt like the end of the world, exactly where secrets came to surface. They settled in quickly. Junie took the upstairs bedroom facing the water. She lined the windowsill with her sketches, faces mostly. Eleanor in a dozen expressions, Harrison in a few. Even Santiago, sketched mid-yawn, though she never admitted it. Santiago walked the grounds twice a day, checked the perimeter, ran the generator. He didn't talk unless spoken to, but Harrison noticed the way he always checked Junie's window before calling it a night. The man might have been trained to kill, but he knew how to protect the fragile stuff, too. 2 nights in, the encrypted phone buzzed on the table. Harrison answered with his back turned, voice low. Vincent's voice crackled through. The package is en route. Is she safe? For now. Does she know? A pause. She thinks she's being moved again, but she asked if anyone had called her real name. That nearly broke him. Tell her, Harrison said. Tell her I'm waiting. Another pause. Rear entrance, 17 Hunquak. Be ready. The line went dead. Harrison stood there a while, phone still in hand, heart a silent drumbeat. Later on the terrace, Junie sat on the wide stone railing, legs dangling. She clutched the ring in her palm like always, eyes scanning the waves. Sunset bled across the sky, spilling orange and gold onto the sea. She didn't look at him when she spoke. Do you think she'll remember me? Harrison sat beside her. You brought her back to me. She'll remember that. Junie nodded slowly, like she wanted to believe it but wasn't sure if she could. Do you think she'll still want you? The question came out small, like it embarrassed her. He smiled, just a little. I don't know, but I never stopped wanting her. Junie looked at the ring again. She's not going to be the same, is she? No, Harrison said quietly. Neither am I. They sat there in silence, the kind that stretched but didn't break. The Mediterranean had never looked so still. The breeze had quieted to almost nothing, the kind of hush that feels less like weather and more like the earth itself is holding its breath. The sun was slowly folding into the sea, casting a gold path over the water that shimmered like an invitation. Harrison stood barefoot at the edge of the sand, collar unbuttoned, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on the small wooden boat easing toward the private inlet. He couldn't say what he felt. It wasn't just hope. It wasn't only fear. It was all of it. Regret, longing, guilt, and something beneath that he hadn't dared name in a year. Possibility. The boat moved with purpose, not fast, not hesitant. It moved the way someone walks when they already know the path home. And then he saw her. The woman stood at the bow, hand gripping the railing, hair cut shorter than he remembered, darker too. She wore a long, sea-colored blouse that caught the light like silk. As the boat scraped softly against the sand, she stepped down, barefoot like him. The moment her feet touched the earth, she paused, eyes scanning, body tense. He didn't move. She looked up, and time, as it had been for so long fractured and scattered, seemed to pull itself into one whole breath between them. Her lips parted slightly. She took a single step forward, and then another. It wasn't until she was nearly an arm's length away that Harrison saw the tears in her eyes, wide and uncertain, as if afraid that saying anything would break whatever fragile bridge had brought them both here.
"I was so sure I'd never see you again," she whispered.
He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached up and touched her face, gentle, like brushing away a memory. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, each version unraveling under the weight of grief or fear or anger, but none of those were here now.
"You're real,"
he said softly. "You lived. You're home." She leaned into his hand, then into his arms, and they stood like that, wrapped in silence, not as husband and wife, but simply as two people who had made it through the storm with enough left in them to still reach for each other. The past didn't disappear, but in that moment it sat quietly beside them. Behind them, Junie stood near the stone steps, still as a statue. She clutched the ring tightly, fingers curled around the familiar shape, her body torn between awe and disbelief. Eleanor's gaze shifted. She saw her, really saw her. Her expression softened. "Junie," she called gently, her voice breaking on the second syllable, as though even her breath had missed the girl. Junie didn't move at first. Her feet stayed rooted, unsure. But then Eleanor opened her arms, slowly, patiently, not calling her closer, just offering. And in that gesture, the last barrier fell. Junie ran. Not fast, not wild, but with certainty. When she reached Eleanor, she didn't speak. She simply crashed into her chest, face pressed against her, arms circling tight as though afraid she might vanish again. Eleanor knelt, holding her close, her fingers threading through Junie's curls. "You kept it," Eleanor murmured, glancing down at the ring. "I wasn't sure. I just hoped." Junie looked up, cheeks damp. "I didn't let go." The ring passed from child to woman with no ceremony, just the soft slide of metal over skin. Eleanor slipped it back onto her finger, hands trembling. "I never should have taken it off," she whispered. "You didn't," Junie replied. "You just gave it to someone who could carry it for you a while." The sun slipped lower, the sky bleeding soft orange and lavender into the horizon. The three of them sat on the sand, not touching now, not needing to. They had said all that mattered without saying much at all. There was no rush, no speeches. Some things, when broken and buried, take time to come back to the surface. But when they do, they're different. Not perfect, but purer somehow. Junie rested her head against Eleanor's shoulder while Harrison sat opposite, watching them both as though he still couldn't quite believe it. Eleanor caught his gaze and held it. Her eyes didn't sparkle like they used to. They were steadier now, more weathered, but clear. She reached for his hand across the space between. Eleanor's fingers were cool against his palm, but her grip was sure. She didn't speak right away, and Harrison didn't push. He just let her hold on, the way people do when words haven't caught up to the weight of what's been survived. The wind had picked up just slightly, not enough to stir the sea, but enough to carry the sound of the waves through the open terrace doors behind them. Inside the villa, the light had gone soft and golden, the kind of light that made even silence feel like a conversation. Eleanor took a deep breath and let it out slowly. "There are some things I need to tell you," she said. "I figured," Harrison replied, giving her hand a small squeeze. "Whenever you're ready." She looked down at the ring on her finger, the one Junie had carried like a mission, and turned it slightly as she spoke. "It started with a grant request, just a routine audit, nothing dramatic, but something didn't sit right. Amounts moved too quickly, recipients that didn't exist. At first I thought it was a clerical error, but it kept happening." Her voice was calm, but Harrison could feel her thumb trembling slightly against his skin. I dug deeper. Quietly. I didn't even tell you, because I wasn't sure I was seeing what I thought I was seeing. The foundation. The one my father helped me build. It was being used to funnel money through shell organizations. All of it tied to overseas construction deals, private airports, even military contracts, things we were never supposed to be near. She paused, meeting his eyes. It was global Harrison laundering, kickbacks, bribes, and it all pointed back to Marshall. He didn't flinch at the name, just nodded once. I confronted him, Eleanor continued, her voice thickening. He didn't deny it. Said it was too big to stop now. Said I didn't understand the real world. That I'd always been too soft. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. I told him I'd go public, that I'd turn it all over, and that's when he said something I'll never forget. He said, "You think they'll protect you? You think you're untouchable because you're my daughter? I'd bury you before I let you take down what I've built." Harrison's jaw tightened, but still he let her speak. He didn't threaten me with death. He threatened the children, the girls in the shelters, the kids from the food programs. He knew exactly how to break me. "And so you disappeared," Harrison murmured. She nodded. "Vincent helped me. He wasn't part of it, not really. But he'd seen too much. He knew Marshall's people would come for him too. We faked the accident, used a Jane Doe from a fire case the police never identified. Raphael, he signed off, €500,000. He was bought out." She looked toward the hallway where Junie had slipped away, likely giving them privacy. "I left a letter for you that night. I didn't want you to wonder. I just needed time to finish gathering proof. But Marshall's people must have intercepted it." "They did," Harrison said. "And they made sure I never asked the right questions." Silence stretched between them again. "Why her?" he asked suddenly. "Why Junie? Why give her the ring?" Eleanor smiled softly, and the sadness in it cut deeper than anger ever could. "Because no one else would listen. Not the press, not the police, not even you, back then, at least not until you saw it for yourself." She turned toward the windows, eyes following the shape of the sea. But a child doesn't carry the same doubt. She just believed me. She didn't question my fear. She just took the ring and promised to deliver it. "Would you have believed her?" Harrison asked. Eleanor looked back at him, and her smile faded into something more solemn. "No, that's why it had to be her." The next morning, the house came alive with quiet purpose. While Eleanor and Junie shared a long breakfast on the back patio, soft bread, honey, fruit, and silence, Harrison locked himself in the study and began uploading every file Eleanor had stored. Names, transactions, audio recordings from private board meetings, internal memos with Marshall's signature. The letter he never received had been scanned into her hidden drive, dated the night she vanished. Carlos and Cole coordinated the legal onslaught from 3 cities. Harrison's legal team in Madrid sent packages to Europol, Interpol, and the Spanish Ministry of Finance. Christina's testimony was transcribed, notarized, and included. Vincent, whose face had not been seen since the reunion, had sent a voice recording of his own, confirming Marshall's role, Raphael's payout, and the organized cover-up. By noon, the storm had moved from the sea to the internet. Emails leaked, Cayman accounts exposed, photos surfaced, Marshall with government contractors, Marshall at discreet luxury gatherings, Marshall signing foundation checks to ghost recipients. It was no longer a suspicion. It was a reckoning. They watched the news from the villa's living room, the volume low, the anchor's voice solemn. Interpol has confirmed the arrest of prominent Spanish philanthropist Marshall Fuentes, detained this morning at a private military airfield outside Valencia. Fuentes, known for his extensive charitable work, is now facing charges of fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Eleanor said nothing. Harrison handed her a cup of coffee, his hand brushing hers. She watched the screen. watched as the footage replayed. The handcuffs, the flashbulbs, the face she had known her whole life made suddenly unfamiliar under the weight of truth. Junie curled up beside her, resting her head on Eleanor's shoulder. "Is it over?" the girl asked. Eleanor paused before answering. "It's beginning." Later that night, when the reporters had camped outside the private road and calls were pouring in from press and politicians alike, Harrison stepped out onto the balcony to breathe. He didn't expect Eleanor to follow, but she did. She slipped beside him, her hair pinned loosely, a throw wrapped around her shoulders. She leaned on the railing, looking out at the sea. "I used to think home was a place," she said. "But it's not. It's a person. Or maybe it's people. It's whoever stays when everything else falls apart." He nodded. "Then this is home." 6 months passed with the steady pace of healing. Slow, uneven, but true. The world didn't forget Eleanor Ford's disappearance. Not with her name splashed across international headlines, not with the footage of her emerging from a villa in Altea hand in hand with a man once presumed a grieving widower. But what shocked people most wasn't her return. It was her refusal to focus on revenge. At her first public appearance, she stood behind the podium in a pale blue dress, the one Junie picked out and said made her look like hope. Her voice, once hidden in whispers beneath stone ceilings in Sicily, now carried through microphones with the calm certainty of someone who had found peace on the other side of survival. "I'm not here today to talk about the man who tried to silence me," she said, eyes steady behind the cameras. "I'm here to talk about the girl who wouldn't let me disappear." She paused. A girl with no family name, no home, and no reason to care, except that she believed someone should. She carried my ring, my message, and my hope through a world that had already failed her, and she gave me back my life. At the back of the room, Harrison stood with his arms folded, jaw tight with pride. Junie sat next to him in a borrowed blazer 2 sizes too big, hair braided, lips pressed together like she was trying not to smile too wide. But she smiled anyway. The adoption hearings were not simple. Nothing involving bureaucracy ever is, especially not when you're a single man with influence, seeking custody of a child who technically didn't exist in any legal system. No birth certificate, no hospital records, only a tattered note from a deceased mother and a small necklace shaped like a bird. Still, Harrison showed up to every court date. He answered every question, submitted every document, gave every honest word they asked of him. Not just because he owed it to Junie, but because he couldn't imagine another day where she didn't wake up in the room down the hall. When one of the judges asked, point blank, "Why are you choosing to adopt this girl?" Harrison didn't hesitate. "I'm not adopting a stranger," he said. "I'm recognizing family. This child saved my wife. She reminded me how to love. She reminded me how to live." They made it official 2 weeks later. Junie Ford. She signed the papers with a hand that trembled and cried later in the car, not because she was scared, but because she didn't know it could feel like this, like finally belonging didn't have to come with a catch. The first day of school with her new name was a Tuesday. Eleanor picked out her shoes, Harrison packed her lunch, and Junie triple-checked the backpack like a soldier prepping for deployment. They walked her to the gate together, one on each side, and when she turned to wave before disappearing into the courtyard, Harrison noticed she didn't just wave. She squeezed their hands first, like a promise. Their lives in Altea were not flashy. They made it that way on purpose. The villa became a home in pieces, a dented kitchen table from a local market. Curtains Eleanor sewed herself. Harrison built a treehouse out back that was slightly crooked but solid. Junie painted the walls in her room the color of late sunrises and taped her sketches everywhere, most of them of birds, waves, and people she didn't want to forget. Evenings were their time. No schedules, no noise, just the quiet rhythm of 3 people finding a new way to belong to one another. One Thursday, Junie came home talking a mile a minute about a science fair project involving magnets and foil. She described it so fast that Eleanor had to ask her to slow down, twice, just to catch half of it. Harrison leaned back in his chair on the patio, watching the two of them at the table with the orange juice pitcher and half-cut apples between them. For a moment, he didn't speak. He just listened to the way their laughter overlapped, the way Junie's eyes sparkled when Eleanor teased her gently, the way the house didn't feel quiet anymore. Later, after Junie had run outside to test her project in the garden, Eleanor turned to Harrison. "Do you remember that morning, back before all this, when I left for Madrid and it started raining?" He nodded. "I stood out in the driveway until I was soaked through, and you said you prayed." "I did." She rested her head on his shoulder. "What did you ask for?" He smiled softly, eyes on the girl dancing in the grass with her makeshift science contraption. "I asked for a miracle," he said. "Turns out, I got two." One evening, weeks later, a letter arrived in the post. No return address, no name, just Harrison's full name handwritten in careful block letters. Inside was a short note. "If you're reading this, then you know the truth by now. I did what I did out of fear, but I never stopped fearing what would happen if I didn't. I'm sorry. I wasn't brave. She was. You were. And that girl, she's what this world needs more of." Signed simply, Raphael. Harrison didn't show it to Eleanor. Not that night. Some things didn't need to be spoken aloud, but he folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer beside the ring box, beneath the old picture of their wedding day. Now faded at the corners, but still warm in color. He stepped out onto the terrace where Eleanor stood with a mug of tea, hair swept back, gaze on the sea. Behind them, Junie's laughter rang out from her upstairs window as she chased something. Maybe a dream, maybe a toy, across her bed. He slipped his arm around Eleanor's waist. "We're gonna be all right," he said. She leaned into him. "We already are." 1 year to the day since Eleanor stepped off that boat and back into his arms, Harrison stood barefoot on the same patch of sand, the tide whispering at his feet. But this time, there was no waiting, no holding his breath. There was only peace, quiet, earned, and whole. The ceremony wasn't grand. That had never been their way. Just a handful of people gathered on the terrace of the seaside villa, lanterns swaying gently in the ocean breeze, and the kind of hush that came when everyone knew why they were really there. Not to celebrate, to give thanks. Vincent stood near the edge, hands in his pockets, nodding quietly as guests passed. Christina arrived late, holding a basket of lavender from her hillside garden, her eyes warmer than they'd been the year before. And Eleanor. Eleanor had done what she once feared she never could. She'd come back to herself. Junie stepped up to the small wooden platform they'd set up near the garden wall, holding a folded piece of paper in both hands. Her voice, when it came, was stronger than anyone expected, but soft, measured. "The poem's called Family Doesn't Need Blood, Just Heart," she said. And then she read, "Some names are sewn into skin, but mine was written in arms that opened, not because they had to, because they chose to. Some people are born to you, and some arrive with a knock, a ring, a storm, but they stay, and that's what makes them yours." No one clapped. They just stood still, some teary, some smiling. Eleanor pulled her close, brushing a kiss to her temple. Harrison stepped forward, holding a small box. Inside was a silver necklace, its pendant engraved with 3 letters, M-H-L. He knelt slightly as he fastened it around her neck. "You're the link," he said. "The piece that makes us whole. Not out of obligation, not out of circumstance, out of love, simple and true." Junie wiped a tear from the corner of her eye, then leaned into his chest. And just like that, the little family that had fought their way through fire and silence stood there, together, forged not by blood, but by choice. After the guests drifted away, after the sun had dipped into the sea and the last of the candles had been blown out, Eleanor and Junie walked the same stretch of beach where it all began. Junie's voice was quiet, but sure. "If I hadn't been there that night, if I hadn't taken that ring, Eleanor squeezed her hand. Then someone else would have found me. Somehow. Because when people are meant to return to each other, the world finds a way. Junie looked up, older now in her eyes than her frame. Even after everything, you believe that? I have to, Eleanor said, glancing toward the villa, where warm light spilled from the windows like a second sunrise. Because that belief is what brought me home. That night, as the house settled into silence, Harrison stood at the window, watching the waves roll against the shore. Behind him, Eleanor played an old tune on the piano, one she'd played on their wedding day. The melody wrapped around the walls of the home they'd made, filled every corner with memory and promise. Junie sat at the table nearby, sketching again, this time a picture of 3 people standing in a circle, hands linked beneath a sky full of stars. Harrison turned back to the sea and whispered just loud enough for the walls to keep it. Family, no one's taking it from me again. And with that vow, quiet, simple, certain, a new chapter began. This time, not in fear, but in fullness. And for the first time, they weren't running from the past. They were walking straight into their future, together. This story is a powerful journey through grief, hope, and redemption. What makes it truly unforgettable is how deeply it explores the emotional lives of its characters, particularly Harrison, Eleanor, and Junie. Each of them begins in a place of loss. Harrison grieving a wife he thinks is gone, Eleanor surviving in hiding with her truth buried, and Junie, a child discarded by the world but still brave enough to believe in something good. What's most moving is how love, in its purest and most courageous form, becomes the thread that pulls them together. Harrison's transformation, from a cold, grieving man to a father willing to fight for a child who saved his heart, is subtle but profound. Eleanor's strength is quiet but unshakable, and Junie, with her sketchbook and soft-spoken loyalty, reminds us that even the smallest acts of faith can change the course of lives. The story teaches a deeply human lesson, that family is not defined by blood, but by choice, trust, and love. It's about fighting for those we care about, even when the world tells us to let go. Ultimately, it reminds us that healing begins when we stop running and start choosing each other. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and share it. Leave a comment to tell us how it inspired you, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you and be with you every step of the way.